The 7 lots that I've discussed as works from a private American collection share a certain refined sensibility, whether a photographically illustrated book, a travel album, a fine art photograph, a carte postale. I'd also like to highlight some of the works in our sale that are from multiple consigners. Lot 110 is Felix Beato's album of Japan and Korea with 66 photographs, most of them hand-colored. Beato was one of the first photographers to travel to Japan once the country was opened up after Admiral Perry's expedition in 1852-54. He's considered one of the most exceptional photographers to document Japanese culture, and when we look at the images represented in this album, I think we can see why. The vignetted photograph of the tattooed figure is probably one of the most exotic images to come out of Asian culture in the 1870s. And of course, the popularity of tattooing today is something that we can't fail to connect. Apparently, for the armchair traveler, Beato's images were representations of a culture that was far away, very insular, very picturesque, and really quite exotic. The companion image of the geisha, again, shows us something of a world about which a Western person would know absolutely nothing and would simply be fascinated by the figure preparing herself for public exposure, whether it's as the geisha artiste or simply to walk out the door and be prepared to walk in the street. These images, as you can see, are very delicately hand-colored, and this was something that he was influenced by the ukiyo-e, the Japanese woodcuts. So while the albumen photographs in and of themselves were very accomplished renditions, the addition of hand coloring, which was done by local Japanese artisans, has a beautiful add-on quality that really brings the pictures to life. In addition to the very beautiful ethnographic images, Beato made a military scene of an execution that once again underscores the very different, and in this case quite brutal, nature of a culture that Westerners were just learning about. So all in all, the idea that Japan would be brought to life as a photographic document in 1871, 1872 by a photographer who spent a good 20 years in the culture is another example of the travel album. Lot 117 is André Kertész's iconic study, Chez Mondrian. Kertész was a Hungarian photographer who, like many artists of the 1920s, emigrated to Paris to learn the craft and technique of his chosen medium and to meet artists that were also congregating in Paris from all over Europe. One of the first artists that he met was Mondrian. And he said later on when discussing this photograph that he wanted to render the simplicity of Mondrian's studio. When we look at this picture, what's interesting about it is it's almost two different pictures. The left side of the picture, we see Mondrian's boater hat. We see this vase, which contains apparently an artificial flower that Mondrian hand-colored so that would fit into the environment of his studio. And then the right side of the picture has a sort of modernist, angular, sparse quality to it that certainly is reflective of the new idiom that Kertész was exploring within this very lyrical context. The print that we're offering is called a modern print, which is to say it was made many years after the negative in the 1960s when Kertész was revisiting older negatives. Certain photographs have a kind of universal appeal. They seem to speak to collectors at all different levels. And certainly Chez Mondrian is one of those pictures. It's widely reproduced not only in monographs associated with Kertész's own body of work, but in probably every major photographic history and survey book, as well as, the top 100 photos of the 20th century. Lot 146 is Aaron Siskin's abstract photo entitled Chicago, 1952. In 1930, when Siskin married, he was gifted his first camera, and he began to explore photography as a medium of creative expression. In the 1940s, he went to Harlem and began to make figurative studies of the people and places that he met. But in the late 1940s, he sort of revisits that approach, which was obviously about description and subject, and reformulates a style that's about abstraction and emotion. Siskin is probably one of the most important 20th century photographers, though somewhat underappreciated, because it can be hard to engage with the imagery. Having said that, he was someone who was close friends with the abstract expressionists. He, in fact, made images that were an homage to Franz Klein. And there's a wonderful film about Siskin where he's shown along the side of a highway, and there are all these patterns of tar, swirling patterns of tar that he's photographing. And he looks at the camera and he says, "If life is about making choices, I could live here for the rest of my days." So he takes this sort of everyday approach, looking at posters that are sort of peeling off the wall, looking at rock formations, looking at the kind of everyday quotidian abstractions that we see, that we register, that we can impart some sort of emotional content to, and he elevates them. I think that this particular print is larger than what we usually see in Siskin's early work. It's signed, it's titled, he gives it the title Chicago, which is somewhat typical of how he worked, citing the place, that is to say, versus giving it a kind of metaphoric title. Siskin transformed photography as a medium of self-expression by focusing on abstract forms, by elevating them, and by using photography as a context in which to render them. Our February 7th sale is an exciting auction in which we're highlighting photographs, albums, and books from a private American collection. These works are complemented by prints and albums from various consigners. Our fully illustrated catalog is accessible on our website. For those of you in the New York area, come to our preview where you're welcome to handle the photographs under supervision and see the sale for yourselves.